I've got a spicy one for you today, guys. The biggest teachers union in Minnesota, which from henceforth I'll be referring to as the Minnesota Ministry of Truth, has released a manual for teachers and students to deal with objections to critical race theory. But wait, I thought CRT wasn't being taught in American schools. Alpha News, which is an independent Minnesota news organization, writes, following intense and frequent backlash from communities across the state, the Minnesota Ministry of Truth is doubling down and has now released a resource for educators on how to deal with critical race theory. The Minnesota Ministry of Truth claims that the term critical race theory is, quote, unfamiliar to most audiences, is only political, and should not be used. Talk instead about more honest and more complete education our students deserve, the ministry advises. The instructions urge educators to avoid negative phrases like closing the achievement gap, but to use aspirational phrases like the idea that they just want their students to be good citizens. The ministry encourages teachers to, quote, seize the moral high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground! You underestimate my power!
They also favor turning the conversation to the motives of the opposition by asking their critics why they are attacking standards, equity, and classroom educators. So without further ado, let's get into this document provided by the Minnesota Ministry of Truth. It's called Responding to Politically Motivated Attacks on Racial Equity in Schools. Educators across the country are experiencing a well-coordinated, multi-state attack on racial equity in public education. Key concepts for responding. 1. Seize the moral high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground! I have the high ground! You underestimate my power! That's right! That's right!
Number 2. Ascribe motivations to the opposition. Instead of reflexively repeating the opposition's claims to dispel them, in other words, instead of addressing your opponent's actual arguments, instead of addressing the arguments of the actual parents that are coming in with concerns about what their children are being taught. Instead, talk about why they're attacking the standards, equity, and classroom educators. In other words, instead of addressing the actual concerns that parents are bringing to school board meetings and to teachers themselves, engage in mind reading. Claim to know why the parents are actually attacking this dangerous ideology and expressing concern for their children better than they know why themselves. It's worth noting that this term honest appears over and over again all throughout this propaganda document. For example, we want to prepare our students to be critical thinkers, good citizens, and future leaders by giving them a more honest look at where we've been. Talk instead about a more honest and more complete education our students deserve. That includes an honest look at our history and learning to respect and understand people regardless of what they look like. And here that just repeats it. That includes an honest look at our history and etc. This claim that critical race theory is just trying to teach honesty, that it's only concerned with being honest, giving children an objective view of reality, of history.
The fact that they're choosing whether or not to teach critical race theory, the whole thing about them not wanting their children to learn that they were oppressors in itself is showing that they are oppressors. Because usually when a people conquers another people and oppresses them, those people get to write the history. Historical facts should be based on facts, right? They should be based on truth. They should be what really happened. That's real history. That's history 101. But in American school systems, history is written by the conquerors, and therefore you don't get a complete view of history.
Is repeated over and over, not just in this document, but you hear all the time in the media, we just want to teach an honest history of what America was really like. Guys, this is total BS. This is complete and utter propaganda.
Today we are discussing critical race theory. A group of legal scholars came together in the 1970s and 80s because they were dissatisfied with the way of thinking about race that came out of the civil rights movement. Scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, Gary Peller, and Derek Bell became the founders of a new movement called critical race theory. One of the core claims of critical race theory is that objectivity is not possible. Anything that claims to be objective, whether you're talking about knowledge or the standards by which we judge academic achievement, is actually white supremacy in disguise.
They're going to challenge the idea that rational thought and objectivity is the best way of knowing, because those are in fact rooted in masculinity and in Western ideology. So they reject that.
And since there's no objective truth anyway, then the stories are equal.
And that's what makes it so magical.
Since what's quote-unquote true changes all the time, such as the Earth being flat and that certain races are constitutionally servile, how is it that we can ever claim to know any fact? Now, your motivations are suspect. For example, if you state that discriminating against men is wrong, they don't respond directly, but instead think, okay, why are you saying what you're saying? What self-serving power structure are you reinforcing? In other words, they'll attack what they believe you're speaking into rather than what you're speaking about.
So if critical race theorists don't even believe in objective truth and view the world instead as an eternal battleground between competing power narratives, how can they be teaching our children the honest truth about our own history? They don't even believe in truth. They simply believe that brainwashing children with their anti-American narrative is better than us brainwashing our children with a pro-American narrative. So with that understood, let's return to the document. So here is a section titled Responding to Nonsense, where they give you an example of what a concerned parent or citizen might ask, and then give you a propaganda response to spout off at it. For example, why are you teaching children that all white people are racists? Which critical race theory does teach that explicitly. And here's the propaganda response. First off, I'm thrilled you're taking such a deep interest in how and what our kids are taught, a conversation that I feel is long overdue. What I know most Americans believe is that we expect our students, whatever their color or background, to be able to learn hard truths and handle honest history and civics. I believe in children's potential to meet new challenges and have an honest reckoning. And when we try to edit and distort our history, we are doing them and our future a disservice. So essentially, they're not really responding to the question of why are you teaching children that all white people are racist. They're giving this very deflective, roundabout answer that constantly mentions, don't you want children to have an honest history, an honest reckoning of American history? Don't you want us to not distort our history? That's not what I asked. I asked, why are you teaching children that all white people are racist? And I think the propaganda answer that they're teaching teachers to respond to parents with implicitly admits that all white people are racist by saying, well, that's the honest history of America. But as we just covered, critical race theorists don't even believe in honesty. They don't believe in truth. There's no such thing. They're not teaching the honest truth. They're teaching their truth through a critical Marxist lens that America is evil and white supremacist. So that's just an example of the kind of tactics this propaganda document is encouraging. So here's another question that an angry parent might ask. Critical race theory is Marxist indoctrination, racist against whites, or counter-genocide. And the propaganda response is to say, our kids deserve age-appropriate and accurate history lessons, helping them to become the critical thinkers we need to make this country more just, prosperous, and equitable. And then it specifically says here, do not say critical race theory is not, whatever. In other words, ironically, they're tacitly admitting, well, yeah, critical race theory is Marxist indoctrination, racist against whites. They're telling the educator, don't defend that claim or don't try to push back against that. It's true. Instead, shift the conversation, move the goalposts, right? Frame the narrative in a different way. We just want to help our children become critical thinkers and have accurate history lessons. But again, going back to what I said before, they don't believe in accurate history. They don't believe in this kind of objective truth of history. There's just these competing power narratives, and they think their power narrative is better than the, dominant white supremacist, hegemonic, et cetera, et cetera. This is totally dishonest. Another question a concerned parent might have is, in America, we are colorblind. Race shouldn't matter. Critical race theory divides us instead of uniting us. And then the politically correct, propaganda answer is, we should live in a state where anything is possible for anyone to achieve. And again, this is a really ironic claim coming from a critical race theorist, because they already believe that white people have all the power and black people are victims. And so how is teaching children that they're victims, that they can't get anywhere in life, that the system is stacked against them, all the cards are against them, how is that building a world where anything is possible for anyone to achieve? It's the total opposite. It's creating a dichotomy where only white people can be successful, and black people will always be under the foot, in the chains of slavery. Here's a good one. People of color encounter hardships every day that white people do not. This is one of the primary claims of critical race theory, right? It's, again, this is just an example of taking away our individuality as human beings and putting everyone into a racial box, and identifying people by their race, not by who they are as a person. So this claim that people of color encounter hardships every day that white people do not, it's false. It's completely false. The worst thing happening to any given black person in a day in America is also happening to a white person. I grew up in Appalachia, right? I grew up in West Virginia. I grew up in the poorest state in the poorest state in the entire country, and most of the people who live there are white, and they live in oftentimes horrible conditions, just as bad or worse than any ghetto, in the country. And there's a massive drug epidemic. There's all kinds of social, cultural, and political problems. And to say that because they have white skin, it's easier on them, when they lose their child to a drug overdose, or to someone killing another person, that it's easier because their white skin makes it. This is insane. This is insane. This is bad faith. This is one of the primary claims of critical race theory that we should just not take seriously, and is profoundly racist. And finally, a concerned parent might, approach the educator with a question: critical race theory should be banned in our schools. That doesn't make me a racist. And the PC propaganda answer is, I'm so glad you're taking an interest in how schools present information in age-appropriate ways about racism in American history. It's like, this is so condescending, right? It's so condescending. It's so changing the topic. I hope we can agree that students need lessons and guidance in school to understand people this is just like, it's almost like legalese, right? It's like corporate speak. It's like, oh, let's just speak in these really verbose and, let's gish gallop the hell out of this parent until they just don't. It's like, we'll just confuse them with flowery language until they just go away and leave us alone. Guys, I don't know. I think this document speaks for itself. I think, I'll link it in the description. Read it yourself. If you think that, the Minnesota Ministry of Truth has done a great job here. I applaud you.
What they want to do is to take over the schools. And the question of who controls education has always been a much more difficult issue. What the critical race study people want to do is they want to take over the curriculum and basically make sure that nobody who disagrees with them has a chance to speak.